On September 13, 1998, controversial American politician George Wallace dies in Montgomery, Alabama at the age of 79. George Wallace first ran for governor of Alabama in 1958. He was actually endorsed by the NAACP in that election. He lost. Wallace ran again in 1962, this time as a segregationist. It was a landslide victory. At his inauguration in 1963, he gave a now famous speech which included the words, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever." In 1963, Wallace stood in front of Foster Auditorium at the University of Alabama in a futile attempt to block the integration of the school by black students Vivian Malone and James Hood. He continued his efforts to stand in the schoolhouse door later that year by attempting to block black students from enrolling at 4 separate elementary schools in Huntsville, Alabama. Wallace's opposition to integration led him to announce that he would challenge President John F. Kennedy, a fellow Democrat, in the 1964 presidential primary. Wallace made this declaration in Dallas, just days before Kennedy's assassination in that same city. In 1965, Wallace sent state troopers to Selma to block attempts to march to the state capitol in Montgomery. This resulted in the infamous Bloody Sunday incident at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. At the time, under Alabama law, governors could serve an unlimited number of terms, but could not serve consecutive terms. So, in 1966, his wife Lurleen Wallace ran as what many considered a proxy candidate for governor. She won the election, becoming the state's first female governor, but died of cancer in May 1968, and was replaced by Lieutenant Governor Albert Brewer. In 1968, Wallace ran for president as a third-party candidate with the American Independent Party. This campaign for president occurred amid his wife's battle with cancer. He got on the ballot in all 50 states with a platform promoting law and order, states' rights, and racial segregation. Wallace's running mate was Curtis LeMay, the retired U.S. Air Force general who implemented the effective yet controversial strategic bombing campaign in the Pacific theater of World War II, which included the firebombing of Tokyo and other Japanese cities. LeMay served as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 1961 to 1965 under U.S. Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. With LeMay as his vice presidential candidate, Wallace won 5 states and 46 electoral votes, making him the most recent third-party candidate to carry a state in a presidential election. Wallace was elected as Alabama's governor for a second term in 1970, and in 1972 he ran again for president, this time as a Democratic primary candidate. At a campaign rally in Maryland, Wallace was shot 4 times by a 21-year-old busboy named Arthur Bremer. Wallace survived, but was paralyzed from the waist down. He ultimately lost his campaign for the 1972 Democratic nomination, finishing second in the delegate count. Wallace was re-elected as governor of Alabama in 1974 and made another failed attempt at the presidency in 1976. It was during the 1970s, after his near-death experience, that Wallace began contacting civil rights leaders to ask forgiveness for his past actions. In 1979, Wallace said of his stand in the schoolhouse door, quote, "I was wrong. Those days are over, and they ought to be over." End quote. In 1982, he was elected Alabama's governor once again, but this time with black support. During that 4th and final term in office, Wallace appointed more blacks to state positions than any other Alabama governor. This included 2 members of his cabinet. Governor Wallace met with civil rights leaders in Selma in 1985 on the 20th anniversary of the 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery. Wallace also met with Vivian Malone and James Hood, the students he had attempted to block from the University of Alabama decades earlier. Wallace apologized to each of them and said that during the Civil Rights Movement, Vivian Malone, quote, conducted herself with grace, strength, and above all, courage, end quote. For his part, James Hood stated that he believed in the sincerity of Wallace's apologies and said that Wallace was haunted by people's lack of forgiveness for his actions. James Hood attended George Wallace's funeral in 1998. Here are other events that happened today in history. In 1759, in the French and Indian War, the British defeat the French outside Quebec City. In 1847, during the Mexican-American War, the U.S. Army seizes control of Chapultepec Castle. In 1862, during the American Civil War, Union soldiers find a copy of Lee's battle plans for Antietam. In 1936, 17-year-old Cleveland pitcher Bob Feller strikes out 17 batters, setting an AL record. In 1971, a 5-day prison riot in Attica, New York ends in a bloody assault by law enforcement. In 2004, Oprah Winfrey surprises the people in her studio audience by giving each a new car. In 2024, a 58-foot-long bronze sculpture is unveiled at the World War I Memorial in Washington, D.C. And now it's time for our Today in History quiz. Which of the following was one of the 4 original Pop-Tart flavors? Wild berry, chocolate chip, peach cobbler, or apple currant? Think you know the answer? Drop your guesses in the comments below. Find out if you're right next time on Today in History. You made it through Today in History. Nice work. Now treat yourself. Click the video on the right for what happened yesterday in history. Still can't get enough? The link on the left's got the whole playlist buffet. Want to make history a daily habit? Click my face in the middle to subscribe.